New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. Thank you for joining me today on the Inclusive Church, where we come together every week on Tuesdays at noon Mountain Time and talk about what are some of the opportunities to be more inclusive in our spiritual communities, what are some of the issues that we face as we are building or maintaining inclusive communities, issues, opportunities, what are some of the things we can do that help us build or grow inclusive spiritual environments. Just in case this is your first time seeing Inclusive Church, I'm the author of a book, Stained Glass Spirit, and I'm looking because I usually have one right near me. Stained Glass Spirit, Becoming a Spiritual Community where oneness does not require sameness. So you can learn more about me and about this whole concept of having spiritual communities that are inclusive by visiting Stained Glass Spirit on Facebook or stainedglassspirit.net as that place on the internet where I post inspiring or inspirational quotes to keep you motivated, sometimes have links to webinars or recommendations about books that you can read. And before I forget, I do need to tell you about what's coming up in the month of September, right here, integrated into the Inclusive Church show. So we are going to dive into the book, Finding Refuge. And it came up a few weeks ago, this book. I used it as a reference of something that you might want to read if you wanted to go a little bit deeper into the impact of grief for different communities and the grief of the whole church. That as you are being more inclusive, you have to let go of certain things and certain ideas and certain practices, and also sharing in the grief of individual identity groups, the grief that comes from being that person in the world every day and sharing that grief together. And when I used it as a reference, I remember in the show saying, you know what? I think maybe we'll read this book. So the month of September, we're going to go through the entire book. Each week I will have someone different with me talking about certain chapters, and here's what you can expect. So that's what we're doing in September. But I'm really excited about it because of some of the people who are saying yes to come on and talk about what stood out for them in each of the 7 chapters in this book. So please come back and hang out with us in September. But what are we doing today? Today, the theme, the focus is proximity. And we're going to take the next 30 minutes or so to talk about this whole idea of proximity. And it's really interesting to me that even today in 2025, how often people will say they understand another group's experience, another person's experience, but another group's experience because they have a neighbor, right? Or because they have a friend who is a member of that identity group, right? Like, I have a friend I work with, and they're a lesbian, and so I get it. I understand what lesbians go through, and you go, really? Or you should go, really? Because you know someone and you see them several times a week at work, you understand their experience. Or recently, I was talking to someone, and we were preparing to go to a retreat in Canada, and they said, "Oh yeah, my neighbor is from Montreal, and I've learned so much about Canadians by talking to my neighbor over the last 5 years." And I didn't make a big deal out of it, but inside my head, I was thinking, well, we're going to be in Banff, in Alberta, Canada, which is like saying I met people in New York, and so I'm going to Utah. I mean, like, distance wise, that their experience might be really different. And yeah, so proximity to someone, to an individual, or even proximity to a small group of people who are in any given category, does not necessarily prepare you to engage with other people in that identity group. So I think in this conversation, we're of course framing it in the idea that within your church, within your spiritual community, there are people who have many different identities that they are part of. If you have a church where you are talking about inclusion, how do you not confuse proximity because you have 20 members who are Black, to assuming that you know and understand what their experience is as a Black person? So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. And that would be true, again, with any identity group. Oh, yeah, about 10% of our population are people who are in the LGBTQ community, and they're out. We know that they are members of the LGBTQ community. And so, yeah, we've got that covered, right? Or I'm really comfortable with, others. And we've made them feel really welcome in our community. Even that line, we've made them feel really welcome in our community, like we've welcomed them in to be with us, means that there is still some separation, and you don't think of them as a part of the community, and the community has not made any changes because of, right, that we are all a part of this community, and here is what we do. Even that languaging of, oh yeah, we welcome them, that group, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's young people or whether it's Asian people, whether it's people with disabilities, if you're still talking about it from the perspective of we are welcoming to them, or we are what they have been welcomed and now they are a part of us, there's still that separation. So let's back up just a little bit and make sure that we're on the same page with proximity and even what it means, right? So proximity, the word, let's talk about the definition of it. So proximity, if you just look for definition, and I love this graphic because it's like, they're kind of little groups of people and they're individuals that are kind of stand out, and they're all linked together, and some of them are closer to each other than others. So there is an element of spatial and temporal nearness, just physically close in space and time. Like we are neighbors, we live next door to each other. We're in the same big community, but we're closer as neighbors. My next door neighbor, right, is physically close. Or in the workplace, the 6 people who are in my department, we see each other every day, and we, talk to each other. Maybe we go to lunch on a regular basis. And so we have more spatial and temporal nearness than I have with the person who works in the accounting department 1 floor down that I see, twice a month. Second key thing to think about with proximity is impact on communication. So there are certain people who I talk to all the time, whether I'm in physical proximity with them or not. So, right, the impact on the communication, because we talk to each other all the time, we have some inside jokes, or we have worked out some terms that maybe would be confusing to others, but we know what we're talking about, and makes the communication easier, and it results in us feeling we understand each other. Proximity can also show up in terms of the role in design organization, like the groups we have. So in our church, for example, within the church, we may have, a group that's hospitality or ushers or greeters, and that group has a lot of proximity with each other. And then we have a women's circle or a women's group, and the women in that group get to know each other really well. And we have a board of directors or a leadership council, and that board of directors is kind of, by the design of our organization, they have more or greater proximity to each other. And that can be used for good. That can be used for good, to create a closeness, to make communication easier. That's one way that proximity can work well. But that same proximity, by being together a lot because we work in the same department, or we have the structure in the church that has these different people working together, it also can have a negative impact, that proximity can create a clique, or that proximity can result in people who share something in common being together all the time and relying on that and not truly engaging with people who are not a part of that group. In the workplace or in a school or in your community, if you have proximity to your next door neighbor and you share meals or you look out for each other when when if I'm traveling, my next door neighbor, is watching my mail and watching for mail or packages being delivered and brings them in for me. I have a neighbor 3 houses down that I may not even know their name, right? Even though we do still have something in common because we live in the same neighborhood, but I may nod at them or I recognize their car, or, if I'm walking in the neighborhood, I wave, so I recognize them. And we do have some proximity because we share some things in common, but I don't know them like I know my next door neighbor. So in that case, me and my next door neighbor, we look out for each other, but maybe not so much with someone 4 or 5 houses down the street. So proximity alone does not always, and actually, I'm going to say it this way. Proximity alone does not usually result in expertise about not just an individual, but a certain group. Right. And so if we're in an inclusive environment, it's really important in our churches, in our spiritual communities, that we, yes, create some intentional proximity or affinity, get people together who have some common background. And it's also really important that we remind people that simply because you've been in a meeting with someone, you may or may not understand their experience. An example comes to mind for me for someone who I was having a conversation with, and this was a few years ago. But it really stood out to me because they were a man of color and they were participating in their church's regular gathering of men, and the majority of the men were white men. And the group itself was very welcoming to this man of color, and he did consider himself a member of the group. But the conversation we were having was he was sharing with me how, in so many ways, he was welcomed, but they didn't really want to know what his experience was as a man of color. He was welcome, and he was welcomed warmly as long as the conversation that he contributed affirmed what they already knew and or didn't make them uncomfortable. So he found himself holding back a lot of things that he wanted to share because as a man of color, he wanted the support of other men, he wanted them to know so they could support. But a few times he had brought up things maybe that were happening in the news that made him uncomfortable, or made him afraid as a man of color living in the world we live in. And he had brought up a few things or asked a few members of the group questions like, well, how do you feel about that? And they would just brush it off that this had happened in the news in their community. And it was like, oh yeah, or the assumption that the person of color who was treated a certain way in the news, that they must have done something wrong. And so it's like, oh, there was a lot of proximity. And the majority of white men in that group probably felt they were very welcoming and they understood and knew a lot about what it means to be Black because they, for a couple of years had been meeting once a month with this Black guy in their group or this person of color in their group. But they didn't know anything because they weren't willing. So proximity itself is not automatically going to give you expertise in a group's experience different from yours, whether that's race or ethnicity or age or sexual orientation or gender identity or ability/disability, all of those things and many more can affect. So proximity versus true experience or true expertise, you want to actually understand the difference. So being near a situation or a subject or a group of people does not mean that you truly understand what they go through. True expertise and true compassion requires effort. So that means you're going to ask different questions. You're going to invite conversations about things that may be a little uncomfortable. You're going to be open to hearing about something really very different than your own personal experience. And the dangers of assumptions based on proximity, it's like if you think you have insights just because you have been near someone or been around someone from an identity group, which also, let me remind you, right, an identity group means if you know 10 people, that doesn't, those 10 people's experience that may or may not match the norms for the entire group. And so if you think, because like the person I was talking to that I mentioned earlier, oh, we're going to Canada and I know this person who grew up in Montreal really, really well, so I'm really ready to go. I'm going thinking I know about Canadians, then it can lead to misunderstandings. It can lead to making some errors in judgment, etc. And so we're focusing on this today because it is such a common mistake to think because I know one person or I've met and worked with 5 or 6 people that I actually know what's going on with that group. So, what can you do to encourage true understanding in your inclusive church? That's really the question. Not what's wrong, but what can you do about it? So I think the first part is really you want to look at and think about yourself. So let's just start with the individual response or the individual inoculation, like preparation, so that you can begin to notice in yourself when you may be mistaking proximity for true knowledge or understanding. So, one of the questions that you can ask yourself, and especially if you're a leader in a ministry or a ministry team, how much has this person who's different from the majority, how much have we required them to accommodate us, to make us comfortable, like to just fit in with who I am or what we've already been doing? Like how much, when thinking about when they joined the church or when they joined your team, how much did you really learn about what was comfortable for them or ideas that they had? And truly, if it's a team that's been functioning for a while, you're not going to change everything every time one new person comes along. But I like to think about, like, if it's a team or a group that meets more than once a month or that serves the church more than once a month, then I like to say after 90 days, right? After 12 or 13 weeks, after 3 months, that have I reached out to this person to say, hey, how is this working for you? Hey, do you have any ideas that of things you've experienced in the past that would help us be even better than we already are? Right? I may not want to do that in the first month because they're just learning what this team is doing. they are new to our church and they're checking us out. But by 90 days, by 3 months, I want to find out, because if they're like, oh, well, I noticed that many of the members of our team hug everybody that comes in. And it just, strikes me as some people aren't going to be comfortable with a hug. Like, in some cultures, men don't hug women that are not in their family, or a handshake could be really uncomfortable. And we should know that and kind of be aware of that. Oh, yeah, wow. We're just so used to hugging everybody that I didn't think about that, right? I want to get their input. Otherwise, they're just adapting. Now, they may be hugging everybody too because that's the norm, but maybe they aren't comfortable doing that. Or maybe they're the one person who's not hugging and nobody's noticed and asked, hey, what's up with that? Anything I should know? Another piece that you can do to that you can personally do, and ideally you must do if you're a leader, but if you're just a member of a team, to actually stop and ask, have a conversation about, when we're here, it's such a cool place, and we support each other. And I'm wondering how that is for you. I'm wondering how it is for you. And that might be internally in the church experience, or it might be in the world. This is actually really an important question if there's been something in the news, or if if it is a cultural month and that relates to someone who's on your team or a member of your church. So I remember the first time that I asked someone who was a member of my spiritual community, and it was Hispanic Heritage Month, right? Mid-September to mid-October, Hispanic Heritage Month. And it was after church, and we were in the fellowship hall. People are eating snacks and drinking coffee or tea, and just in casual conversation, I asked this person, and I said, I know it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and I'm just really curious, is that something you celebrate, and how important is that to you, and what do you do? If you do celebrate it, what do you do that's important? And and we had a conversation, like a 10-minute conversation, and they were sharing, and I learned something new in general, and I also learned something new about that person. And at the end of about 10 minutes, they said, Tracy, I just want to say to you, no one has ever asked me about my Mexican heritage and what it means to me. No one at this church has ever asked me. And I thought, in my head, I was like, really? You got to be kidding, right? Because you are part of this community, and I would think people would be curious about, something like this that is in the news, and that is, you know, a national thing. And no one's ever asked you about your background, about anything, not just this month, Hispanic Heritage Month, but no one had ever asked any question about their Mexican heritage and how it affected the way they saw the world, viewed the world, or experienced the world. And so, but many people would say, oh yeah, we have this Latina woman who's involved in our community, and we've welcomed her, and but you don't know her. This is the difference between proximity and actual relationship, actual connection. And I want all of us, myself included, to be more aware of it. So, how do you know if you have real relationship? So let's look at, it could be church, but it also could be in your community, in school, in your family interactions. Often ask people, so how often have you been to their home? If you say, I understand what's going on with people who are gay. Well, how many times have you been to the home? Not just like to go pick someone up, but actually like in someone's home who is gay, visiting, sharing experience with them, or have them to your home, yes, but more important, their home. It's one thing for them coming to your home, because then they're coming into your experience. When you go to their home, you're going into their experience. Or restaurants and stores and neighborhoods and the activities that are related to someone from that group, right? I used to say I'm really, really comfortable around people with certain disabilities. And usually, if I would be talking about someone who is blind, someone who is deaf, or someone who uses a wheelchair. Those were the three that tended to come up with where I would say, yes, I'm really comfortable. And then one day I started thinking about, why do you say you're so comfortable, Tracy? And I would be like, oh, because I've had direct experience and professional experience engaging with and working with someone who is blind, who was a recruiter at the time, and I was working in HR, and there were certain job fairs and things that we had gone to, and I learned about this person interacting, ways that they could interact with other people in this environment that's wide open to the public. And I realized, it wasn't, I did have comfort, and I had more comfort than most. And I actually had more understanding than most. And I really realized that until I met that person again, maybe 10 or 15 years later, because they happened to be related through marriage to a really good friend of mine, and I didn't know that. And I went to hang out with the family, my friend's family, and got to see this person in a whole nother environment. We had a whole nother conversation that set off a series of conversations about what it's like to navigate this world as a person who is blind. So I knew a lot more than most in a professional setting, but I still couldn't claim that proximity helped me understand kind of the daily life and challenges of this person. So, yeah, when have you been to the home of someone, or really a lot of people who fit in that identity group? When have you gone to restaurants and stores and neighborhood activities that reflect their cultural comfort or their cultural expression? I've gone to the movies with a lot of people, but there have been times where there are certain movies that I want to go to a theater in a community that is adjacent to or near a Black community, because for that particular film, I want to hear people talking back to the screen. I want to hear people talking out loud as a group and narrating the story. And I know that for that particular film, I'm going to find that if I go to a theater where the majority of people are likely to be Black, I don't want to see that particular film in a quote unquote mainstream, which I have a problem with that label, but I don't want to go, to a community where the norm is and the expectation that I can adapt to is just sit there and be completely silent and take the film in, even though you're thinking a thousand things. But I only know that because I know the cultural norm. And there are times when that's what I want to follow. Um, so, a couple of other things to keep in mind if you're trying to make sure that you are not just taking proximity as being educated by or truly understanding. Like, okay, so you have a friend who is of Asian descent, and let's say that their family culture is Japanese. Now they have been in the U.S. Their family has been in the U.S. for 5 generations, but culturally they still celebrate many things that are either Japanese holidays or there are Japanese influence in a mainstream holiday. So have you attended family functions with that person? Have they invited you? Are you aware of the death rites? Have you attended funerals? Family based birthday celebrations, not the birthday party they throw for all of their friends who are not a part of their group, but the way their family actually or their cultural group celebrates their birthdays. What are some of the cultural holidays that you don't celebrate, but you know they do? Have you been invited to participate? I thought I knew a lot about Judaism and that I understood a lot about Jewish culture. And to be fair, I did probably understand and know a lot more than maybe the average person who's not Jewish, because I do tend to ask these kinds of questions. But when I was a chief HR officer, one of our employees who was Jewish had a short illness and then died. And in my official role as the HR person, I was representing the organization, and I got a complete education, right, about practices related to death within the Jewish culture, within the Jewish faith, and within this family in particular. That, I was in my 30s and I didn't know what I didn't know. And now I know that, but it was like, oh, I probably never would know this except I needed to know it to be effective, and because I had enough of a relationship from proximity with this employee, and her family knew me, and that they educated me even as they went through the grief process and the mourning process. So when are you doing that, and how are you doing that in your own community, in your own church? It's information or awareness you have, plus the emotional and cultural elements that all come together, not just physical proximity over time. And the other thing, or the last thing I'll highlight that I often ask people when they're trying to convince me that, oh yeah, no, I know about people from, certain XYZ identity group. Oh yeah, no, I really understand. I really understand what someone who's transgender is going through. Or I really am clear that this is what somebody black is talking about, and whatever the example is, I'll ask them, okay, so can you tell me 5 cultural taboos related to that particular group? Can you tell me 5 cultural taboos that relate to people who are Muslim, right? In the Islamic tradition, what are 5 cultural taboos? In the ways that if you are Muslim, that you behave, what you do, or what are their taboos against? Oh, you feel like you really are because you've been around your teammates at work who come from different Asian backgrounds, Asian descent, cultural groups. Tell me, okay, they don't have to all be from one group, but give me 5 cultural taboos that affect them and that you know about and you know to avoid. And sometimes people like, yeah, this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay. So I would guess that it's more than proximity, that you know that you actually have had some really valuable conversations. You actually been listening. You actually have developed some empathy. You actually have built some trust cross culturally. You actually have had some shared experiences that are not only grounded in your culture, because you can tell me with confidence, clarity, and without having to go look it up on Google what some of the cultural taboos are. And so that's what you want to keep in mind when you are thinking you know about a group different from your own, right? Have you been the model for active listening and building empathy? Have you built trust with someone who is in an identity group different for your own because you have had open and honest communication? And have you had meaningful shared experiences and interactions that have created emotional bonds that have transformed closeness, physical closeness, into true connection, from closeness to connection? This is our challenge in our inclusive or in our churches where there is a lot of diversity. Are we doing more than simply having a lot of people who are different from one another in the same room and moving toward authentic connection? And that's your challenge for this week. Now, I know usually when I don't have a featured guest, I try to keep it to 30 minutes ish. And for this particular topic, I knew I was going to go 45 minutes or so because it's so important. And it's up to us individually to build some relationships one-on-one with people who we are in church with together, right? In meetings with, serving the church together. And we can then model that and ask the right questions in a bigger setting. So it's not just one-on-one. We can model it for others and tell them what we are doing so they can begin to do it as well in order to create authentic connections. So that's this week, the focus on proximity right here on Inclusive Church. And I really hope that you will join me again next week and, of course, throughout the entire month of September, where we're going to be focused on diving deeply into the book, Finding Refuge. But that's it for this week. So I will see you again next Tuesday right here on the New Thought Media Network at 12 noon Mountain Time.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.